swim bait I tell y'all about all the time. Pretty spot. Whoa. Alright guys, so today we're up here on Smith Lake. Trying to turn up some good fish, and yeah, we're targeting some spotted bass, some largemouth and everything else. And today we're going to be talking on some stuff that's a little bit different, so stay tuned. It's something you don't want to miss. Alright guys, so welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing. So today we're going to be specifically talking about the pre-spawn. So we're going into the pre-spawn now, coming out of February. This lake that we're at right now, the water temperature is around 53, and the other lakes that I've been to, they've been anywhere between 55 to 60 degrees, 63 in certain places. So these fish are starting to stage up and get ready to spawn. They're ready to reproduce. It's the main thing. Two main things that bass focus on is food and reproduction, okay? That's how they survive. So let's talk about where these fish would be staging. So, like if you look over here to my right, there is just a clay bank. You got a little bit of riprap that's up out of the water. The water level's down. It goes around to a bend to a little pocket. Now, if you look to my left, we've kind of got the same thing. We've got this slough that goes around the bend, and it's got some riprap, clay bank, and it goes back up into a pocket. But there's a couple things that I want to talk about of why I would fish one area and not the other area, okay? So the one on my left-hand side, this area right here, even though it's enticing to fish, this is typically not going to be an area where these fish are going to stage up, and simply because they cannot spawn in that pocket. There's a run-in in the back of that pocket, so what happens is if the rain or anything like that comes around, it's going to wash their eggs out and stuff, so they know they're not going to spawn back there because it can mess with their reproduction. Now on the right-hand side, we've got the exact opposite, okay? We don't have any run-ins or anything like that in the back of there, so these fish can stage up on like this lone dock right here, or the dock beside me. They could even stage up on the dock on the opposite side of me, but either case, they're going to be close to these little pockets right here, and paying attention to the water temperature is going to be a big key this time of year. So we noticed most of the fish that we caught was in that 52.4 degree range, anywhere from the 52.4 to the 52.6 range. Anything above or below, we wasn't really having a whole lot of luck and wasn't seeing a whole lot of fish. So those are key areas that you can focus on catching largemouth. Now, spotted bass are a little bit different. It depends on whether you're fishing a blueback herring lake or you're fishing a regular lake. So this is the biggest misconception about spotted bass. They spawn early and then it's over with. Typically, I will see fish spawning up on Smith Lake all the way up to into July. Okay, there's these fish that live on the main lake, they die on the main lake, and that's just where they're at their entire lives, feeding on blueback herring and threadfin shad and other, types of food that comes around them, but their main focus is blueback herring and threadfin shad. Those fish that live on your main lake year round, like we caught some spots like you saw in the video earlier that was on the main lake, but they were kind of pushed off to the side of the shelf where they were staging to go back to a little spawning area, if you get what I'm saying. So those type of fish are going to be, they're going to move up, spawn, and when I say spawn, they will move up, drop their eggs, and then move right back out. They're not sitting there guarding them typically or anything like that. They're just mainly focused around food. And then you're going to have your fish, which will be like back in these creeks, that migrate from the main lake. And then you're going to have the fish back in the creeks that live in the main lake and die in the main lake, just like the fish that were on the main lake, okay? So the fish that are in the creeks and the fish that migrate in the creeks are all going to group up in the same area. That's the reason you go back up in these creeks this time of year and you'll catch 40 or 50 fish and you're like, oh my goodness, where's all these fish coming from? Well, you've got a meat of the migration from the fish coming off the main lake, and the fish that are living in the creeks, they stage up in the same area. And a lot of times this produces more aggressive behavior from the bass, because now all the food and stuff that the fish that lives in the creeks had, they're having to compete for, okay? So there's more of a higher bass population. If you remember me talking about, seeing tons of bait fish and not a whole lot of bass, does not mean the bass is going to be active, okay? Because they're not having to compete for the food, so they're not going to be aggressive at all times like they typically would during the spring when the migration of the fish meet. Now, the fish that stage up in the creeks are going to do exactly what I talked about earlier, and the fish that move off the main lake are going to do exactly what I talked about earlier. But the biggest thing is, once you get on an area like this area to the left of me, you catch a few fish or something like that, and you come back a week later and they're not there, understand that they're not far, okay? So they're not going to travel 100 miles to a different point or a different back bend than they was. Okay, they could be anywhere along this side of the bank or this side of the bank. You've just got to find them. That's where electronics come into key, you know, to kind of maximize your time, save your time while you're on the water. So make sure you're using your electronics as efficient as possible. If you don't have electronics, it's as simple as picking up something like a swim bait or anything like that that you can move quickly to cover a lot of water. Now, if you're like me when the spawn gets here and you have a hard time seeing, one of the little tricks that I like to use is it's super simple. Got it taught to me when I was a kid, but it's just a simple Texas rig fluke, okay? And I'm running 3/0 Gamakatsu super line hook, and the reason I'm running the super line hook instead of the deep throat hook like I normally talk about is simply because this is a thicker gauge hook, so it's got a little bit more weight, so the fluke will sink a lot faster. And what I typically do, I'm not going to cast it out far here, but what I typically do, if you look at my fluke out here, I'm going to scoot it across the top of the water, and I'm just going to twitch my rod tip. And what this will tell me is if there's a buck bass guarding a bed. Okay, if there's a buck bass up there that's guarding that area, he will chase this. If I see that buck bass chase this, then I know the female's somewhere close around, and I really need to focus on that area to catch that female. Once I catch that female, I can inspect her and see, you know, if she's beat up or anything like that, because sometimes fish will spawn a couple of times in one area. So you've just got to be careful with all that stuff and pay attention to what's going on. Now, the side of the banks that I want to focus on, this is another key feature. I typically don't want to fish the northern banks. As you can see right now with which way the water direction's pulling from the wind's going to blow out these northern banks, okay? So that's another reason I would fish the opposite bank, is because it's on the southern region, okay? It's going to be warmer, it's going to have less wind pushing up in it, not going to have a bunch of run-ins in it that's going to wash all the eggs and stuff out. So that's going to be a typical area that I'm going to focus on, is the southern banks. Now, that does not mean that the fish won't stage on the northern side, but when the fish start to spawn, they're going to be typically on your southern side. So pay attention to your compass on your graph, or you should have a compass on your phone that you can use if you don't have something on your boat to, you know, tell which way's north, south, whatever. But let's get into the baits. Okay, so we talk about baits all the time. We're going to talk about the baits that we were using today, okay? So one of the biggest baits that we were using, obviously, is the fluke. This is just a Zoom super fluke, okay? I'm Texas rigging it, and the key to this is, especially with the super line hook, I want to, when I Texas rig this, I'm making sure that I'm going through the bend right here inside the fluke. That way, the top of my fluke goes over my knot, so my knot's protected, okay? Because that's one of the biggest things. If you slackline on the fluke a lot, and you're not going to mean to slackline, it's just part of the action of the bait, you can snap it a lot. With this covering up the knot, if the fish gets a full mouthful, you ain't really got to worry about it breaking the knot, because it's got a little bit of give to it. But I'm just standard Texas rigging this. When they bite it, you know, the hook goes through the skin. I use this around docks. I'll skip up under docks, checking for buck bass or any kind of thing that I can. If there's active fish, they'll hit the fluke this time of year. My setup here, this is a 6'9" medium action ghost rod. Use whatever rod you like, it doesn't matter, they're all good. But either way, 6'9" medium action, 6'4" Abu Garcia reel. But you typically want to go with that lower gear ratio reel with the flukes. That way you've got a lot of torque, you've got a lot of power with it. I'm running 15-pound fluorocarbon. And don't forget, guys, anything that I talk about as far as baits and rods and setups and stuff like that is going to be down in the description below. Okay, so another one that we're using today, this is really good around the docks. So if you've got a good dock pattern going, we're getting some wind blowing in, this is typically when I'm going to swap to this bait. This is a spot sticker 3/8 ounce spinnerbait. Okay, the key to this bait is you can burn this bait. So if you're fishing for spotted bass a lot, I can actually burn this bait just like this. And if you notice, the bait's not rolling over on its side. It's not rolling over and flipping and stuff like that like a lot of the other baits do. You can really burn this bait and torque this bait and move it around and push a lot of water to entice those fish to bite. This is a really good spinner bait that I typically use on my blueback herring lakes just because it has a lot of action. I can speed it up super fast. I can slow it down if I want to. But another key feature is the reel. When I'm running a spot sticker, I typically like to stick to the 7:5 to 1 gear ratio. That can be fast for some people, so you may want to step down 7:1 to 1, 6:8 to 1, that's fine. I typically run the 7:5 to 1 just because sometimes these fish will be coming at the bait so fast they will come up behind it and hit it and actually pull the bait towards the boat. So if they do that, I'll lose, you know, that tightness in the line to where I can set the hook really good. The 7:5 to 1 catches up, and typically they're going to be out away from cover and stuff when they're hitting this bait where I use it, because I'm using it around docks. I'm using it around just small things in the water, maybe burning it down a ledge or something like that, trying to get those fish that are looking up waiting to eat. 7-foot medium action rod, or medium heavy action rod, bucket triad. Super simple setup. Like I said, it'll all be linked down in the description. Now this one was the one that's caught 90% of the fish today. Y'all hear me talk about it 100 times. I'm gonna talk about it again because it's working. Strike King Rage Swimmer, 3.75 inch. The reason I'm using the Rage Swimmer, the ribs are turned forward, okay, which creates more resistance. I can slow this bait down super slow, crawl it by a fish. That first largemouth that I caught this morning, that's what had happened. This fish had come out. I saw it swap at the bait and it missed it. Well, I was able to slow it down without the bait sinking super fast, and you know, pull my rod tip up, and the fish come out from under the dock and got the bait again. So if it wasn't for the Rage Swimmer this time of year, it would be really tough with a Kitech or anything like that, simply because the ribs are pointed backwards, so there's not as much resistance, so you can't slow that bait down as much as you could with the Rage Swimmer. Once again, I'm not sponsored by Strike King or anything. That's just simply what I use and the reason that I use it, okay? Let's see here what I got here. 7.5 to 1 gear ratio again, just for that speed. Plenty of torque for what I need it for. Now the fish that are staging on these bends like we were talking about back behind us, where they're going to be coming into the pockets and stuff on the riprap and things like that, this is where this bait's really going to shine. This is the Spro Rock Crawler. This is the 55 version. Okay, this thing dives to like 9 to 10 foot. Phantom Brown is typically the color that I use everywhere unless the water's muddy and I go with a, you know, kind of a brighter or darker color. But either way, you can just pick through that, whatever you want. The colors are not huge, okay? Mimic something natural. Phantom Brown's going to be closer to your crawfish. You know, your whites are going to be closer to your shad. Super simple. We've got a 6/8 to 1 gear ratio. That way we've got plenty of speed. We got plenty of torque. We can do what we need to with it. Very versatile Daiwa reel. 15-pound test. You got to have 15-pound tests, especially if you're going to be hitting rocks and stuff like that all the time, because your line's going to get frayed and all that. And make sure to retie a lot. Check your knot constantly, because if you're running through rocks and stuff, that's typically when you're going to break off, is from your line being frayed from bouncing off the rocks and stuff. So, quick summary. Southern Banks. Southern Banks is going to be your best bet for your pre-spawn stagers, okay? That does not mean they won't be on the Northern Banks. It could be a one-off dock or something like that, has a lot of shad or something like that around it. Check those little areas out too, but typically your Southern Banks is going to be your best bet for your pre-spawners. Make sure that you know, when you're fishing these areas, you're fishing them as efficiently as possible. So if I start catching fish off the end of docks and I'm not catching them anywhere else around the docks, I'm going to take that as a pattern and I'm going to mimic that throughout the lake wherever I'm, you know, fishing for these pre-spawn fish. So you're not wasting your time, you know, spending an hour on a dock that you don't have to, when you're only going to catch 3 or 4 fish off the end of it, or however many is on the dock or wherever you're fishing. So pay attention to little stuff like that. Put it in your mental notes, whatever you got to do. And just simply remember, if there's run-ins and stuff in the backs of these pockets, they're typically not going to spawn in it, because it's going to wash, you know, their bait out, or their eggs out and stuff. So guys, I hope this video helps you. If it does, make sure to like, subscribe, follow for more content. It helps me out a whole lot. And I've got a new members section, so if you want to become a member on the channel, it's $2.99 a month. You'll get these videos as soon as they drop. There's no wait or anything like that. Typically I post my videos a week before. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check that out. Also, it gives you exclusive access. That way you can message me anytime you want to, and you know, I can help walk you through any issues that you have with bass fishing. So guys, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.